Hey everybody. Today is the second part of our author study. Yesterday, I kind of just introduced you to what an author study is, where we talk about the author themselves, what they did. We will talk about a little bit about their life, talk about maybe some of the work that they did and why it's important now. So this week, I mentioned yesterday, this week we will be talking about Dr. Seuss. Now, Dr. Seuss is somebody you've all heard of, even if you don't, you've all heard of his, at least some of his books, even if you haven't heard of him. So what I'm going to do is share my screen and I'm going to go through a little slideshow just explaining all about Dr. Seuss. And we're going to do what's called a short biography. Now, of course, if you were with me a couple weeks ago, or we talked about biographies. Biographies are telling a story about a person. It's real, it's nonfiction, and you are just telling information about a person, a real person. So, of course, Dr. Seuss was a real person. He is no longer alive, but he was a real person. And I know you can recognize probably some of the characters on here. I bet you recognize Captain Hat. You probably recognize the Grinch. There's a couple others in here. And of course, there's lots of books, and we'll talk more about those tomorrow, that he is very famous for writing and illustrating. So he was a writer and an illustrator, mostly known as a writer, but he did do the illustrations as well. So a little bit about Dr. Seuss. His real name was Theodore Seuss Geisel, and he went by Ted. Now, Geisel is a last name that I think he said came from Germany, so it wasn't in English like some of the names that we know. But he wrote books under different names. He used different names that he either made up, kind of just put together, and he didn't write books using his real name. Some of the names he used were Theo Lessig, Rosetta Stone, Theophrastus Seuss, I'm guessing that's how it's said, and of course we know Dr. Seuss. Why he did not want to write with his real name, I don't know. He was born on March the 2nd, 1904. So today is actually would have been his birthday. So today would have been his birthday. That's why we celebrate Read Across America this week. Geisel, or Dr. Seuss, began using that name, Dr. Seuss, when he was a college student, when he was writing and illustrating for magazines, advertisements, newspapers. So he kind of was doing some of these little side jobs while he was in college, and that's kind of how he got into writing and illustrating. In 1937, so that is a pretty good long time ago, in 1937, he wrote his first children's book, which was called And to Think I Saw It on Mulberry Street. And there's a picture of the cover of that book right there. Now, I will go ahead and say I have never read that book. I don't know what it's about, but I may have to try to find it somewhere and read it to you guys. That is one book I do not have of his. So here's a little bit more about him. There's a picture of him when he was younger. You know, at the very beginning, we saw a picture of him when he was older, when he was an older gentleman. Now, this is a picture of him when he was younger, obviously. So Dr. Seuss, and I'm calling him Dr. Seuss because that's how we know him. He served in the Army in World War II. Now, if you don't know what World War II was, it was a big war in the 1940s, which was about 50 years ago now. Yes, let me do my math. No, 60 years ago now. Oh my goodness, my math was off there. So it was a big war. There were a lot of countries involved. It was a lot of different countries involved. A lot of people were hurt or injured or killed in this war. So it was a very big war. And he served in the Army in this war. He kind of got a job in the Army writing and drawing political cartoons, posters, and other propaganda supporting the United States. Now, propaganda, that big word right there, really is just kind of a word that means uh, pictures, writing, things like that, that are trying to convince you of something or persuade you to think a certain way about something. So he was drawing and writing cartoons and posters that supported the United States in the World War II. After the war, so when the war was over, he moved to California with his wife, and he began writing children's books again. So he wrote that one book before he went to war, and then when he came back home from the war, he started writing children's books. Some of his most famous books were written shortly after World War II ended. So within a few years of the war being over was when he wrote some of his most famous books, the ones that we really do know. Many of his most famous books, according to Dr. Seuss himself, weren't meant for entertainment alone. Why else would he want to write books? So I want you to think about that. So he wrote some books that, so a lot of them are very entertaining. They're fun to read, they're silly to read, because there's books that he wrote that have a bunch of made up words, they're silly words, different things like that. But why would he want to, what's another reason he would want to write a book? Well, we will talk a little more about that when we talk about his most famous books, but he said he didn't want to write them just to be entertainment. I want you to think about what would make a book. Why would you write a book if you're not going to use it to be entertaining? So I'm going to wrap this up, his biography. Dr. Seuss passed away in 1991 at the age of 87. So he lived a pretty long life. He passed away in 1991, which was only 30 years ago. So it wasn't that long ago that he was still alive. After his death, he received many honors. So there were libraries named after him, statues of him and his characters. There are awards given out that are named after him. There are lots of different groups and organizations that do things to honor him and his writing and his work. His legacy, which means this is how we remember him, this is what we know about him, is the many books and characters that he created. So now tomorrow we're going to really talk about the books and some of the characters he created, but I bet you can already think of some that he created. We know about the Cat in the Hat. We have the Grinch. We have some other books that are very famous that you've probably heard of, like maybe Green Eggs and Ham. That's another one. And let's see, let's think of one more. Oh, we've also got Horton Hears a Who, and then Red Fish, Blue Fish. Those are some different books that he wrote and did the illustrations for. But of course, two of his most famous characters that we know of when we think of Dr. Seuss are Cat in the Hat and the Grinch. So that is a little bit about Dr. Seuss's life, his actual real life. So the information I just told you was nonfiction, which means it's real. He definitely was a real person. He wrote lots of books. He wrote more than 60 children's books. So think about how many books he wrote. And I can guarantee you I have not read all of them. I read a lot of them, but not all of them. So from here, you've got a little learning check to do that's asking questions about Dr. Seuss himself. Tomorrow, we're going to look at some of his most famous books, famous characters, and talk about those and maybe why he wrote certain books. Because like he said, he didn't want to write some of his books just to be entertainment. So we'll look at some of those books and see, why would he write this? Why would he write this book if it wasn't to be entertained? So go from here, go do your learning check. Good luck on it. I know you guys are going to do a great job, and I can't wait till tomorrow to talk about the books that he wrote and the characters he gave us. I'll see you guys later. Have a great rest of your